Okay, hello everyone. My name is Jay Dulani, and I'm the National Political Education Manager at MediaJustice. I'm speaking to you from Greenfield, Massachusetts, which prior to colonization was inhabited by the Pocumtuck people. I'd like to welcome you to our live event, which is part of the MediaJustice Network's Fall Political Education series that examines public health technology and information with a historical and structural lens. Today's event is a youth-led intergenerational conversation that unpacks public health and racialized disinformation. We are deeply excited to be hosting this event with Generation Justice Leaders for Change Fellow Gianna Ramirez and MediaJustice's own national field organizer on policing and surveillance, Rumsha Sajid. Let me start by sharing a little bit about both MediaJustice and Generation Justice and our wonderful speakers today. MediaJustice is a national racial justice organization. We boldly advance racial, economic, and gender justice in a digital age by fighting for just and participatory platforms for expression. We harness community power through the MediaJustice Network of more than 70 local organizations to claim our right to media and technology that keeps us all connected, represented, and free. Generation Justice is a multiracial, multicultural project that trains youth to harness the power of community and raise critical consciousness through leadership development, civic engagement, media production, and narrative shift in the areas that most impact New Mexicans: racial justice, health, education, early childhood development, and economic security. GJ's mission is to inspire youth to become multidimensional leaders who are committed to social transformation. In New Mexico, Generation Justice has been recognized as the premier youth media and leadership group, and locally and nationally has been the recipient of numerous awards. From Generation Justice, we are honored to have Gianna Ramirez with us, who is a 16-year-old Nuevo Mexicana Chicana and second-generation Mexican-American. She is a 2022 Leaders for Change Fellow. She is from and currently lives on Indigenous Tiwa land in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she attends El Dorado High School as a junior. During her time with Generation Justice, Gianna has researched and trained on topics like disinformation, racialized disinformation, misinformation, media ownership, COVID-19, and more. She is one of the fellows who curated the hashtag Protect Your Hood New Mexico campaign on vaccine equity in New Mexico. And joining Gianna is Rumsha Sajid, who is the national field organizer on policing and surveillance with MediaJustice. She works on campaigns to abolish surveillance, demand accountability from big tech platforms, and resource grassroots activists on how to fight disinformation. She has over 8 years of experience as an organizer and facilitator. Using both her formal and informal education, she moves through the world with a deep respect for youth and elders. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Gianna, who's going to say more about what brought her to today's event.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Jelani, for that amazing introduction. As mentioned, my name is Gianna Ramirez. I use she, her pronouns. And I have been with Generation Justice now for about 3 years. And my current role is as a 2022 Leaders for Change Fellow. I am so excited to be here today, but this summer, we really got to, as part of my fellowship, look at so many various issues, and one of them includes disinformation. Rumsha was able to join us and talk to us about what it is, break it down, and overall hold conversation with a group of youth as we were leaders, a part of this program with Generation Justice. However, prior to that, I joined Generation Justice 3 years ago in, gosh, 8th grade, really due to always having such an interest in media justice, social justice, how do I make change within my community, and overall just be an agent of change as a youth, but also just someone who others can go to for support. And so I joined Generation Justice to kind of be my outlet to hone in on that, to kind of cultivate it, and to learn really what to do with it. And so I'm super thankful for this summer and Rumsha for getting to further that training and pedagogy that we got to just take in, but also for being here today. So thank you so much for having me, and I will pass it to Rumsha.
Thank you, Gianna, and thank you for being here today, and so much gratitude to Generation Justice for holding down this space with us. Again, my name is Rumsha Sajid. I'm the National Field Organizer on Policing and Surveillance with MediaJustice. And in this conversation today, I'm going to take about 15 minutes to talk about definitions of disinformation, talk about the intersection of disinformation and public health specifically, and how it affects our lives in general. From there, I'll pass it back to Gianna to talk more in dialogue about racialized disinformation. So to begin, I am going to put my slides up. Thank you. So to begin, I want to talk about how this work is a lineage of knowledge. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see deep gratitude and appreciation for people who help shape my understanding of disinformation, but also MediaJustice's general understanding of disinformation. And so I think it's an essential practice of political education to attribute knowledge to the people who create it, especially as we're talking about racialized disinformation. I think it's important to give credit to knowledge in order to make it even more credible and thoughtful and rigorous. So big thank yous to this list of people here who have helped shape my thinking and MediaJustice's thinking, such as Aaron Shields, our former national field organizer with MediaJustice, Dr. Joan Donovan, who leads a project called the Media Manipulation Casebook, organizations like Freedom Archives, Center for Study of Political Graphics, First Draft, Brandy Collins Dexter, and one of our partner organizations, Ultraviolet, for specifically their guide on how to spot racialized disinformation. I also want to thank our MediaJustice team today. So Dulani for their work today and for leading our fall series, to Adriana, DJ, and Danny for technical support today, and to thank Generation Justice for being here with us, for Gianna for being an amazing interviewer today, and for your presence, and for Roberta and Barbara for coordinating between our organizations today. So from there, I'll dive into the definitions. Before I get into disinformation historically and currently, I want to define what these terms are. So first, misinformation. To begin, is when information whose inaccuracy is unintentional and spread unknowingly. So an example of misinformation is, say your aunt reposting that there's a traffic jam on Main Street, and telling people to avoid Main Street. She hasn't seen that traffic jam herself or verified that it's true, but she's reposting it to spread awareness about it. And then there's disinformation, which is information that is spread intentionally to target a group or an individual, a movement or a political party, and it's deliberately false and misleading. In the same context of what I just shared, say that there's like an ice cream truck on Main Street and one group of people want it for themselves. So they're going to post on Facebook that there's traffic on Main Street, so everyone avoids the area. But it's actually not true. They just want the area cleared so they have all the ice cream for themselves. The difference in mis and disinformation in these examples is that the disinformation is being shared for the purpose of self-gain. And the misinformation is spread with good intentions, but ultimately is harming people because it's also spreading false information. And then there's racialized disinformation. And in talking about racialized disinformation, I definitely want to name that no disinformation is not racialized. Like there is an important aspect to disinformation and understanding how race plays a role in all forms of disinformation, and often the why, which we'll get to later. But a clear example of racialized disinformation, and to define it, would be that it's campaigns that strategically use fake racial or ethnic identities and or focus on race as a divisive issue to polarize groups. So an example of that could be people questioning former President Barack Obama's birth certificate and saying that because his father is from Kenya, he could not be a citizen, or that his birth certificate is false. And that's just an example of racialized disinformation and the layers of both immigration status and race and ethnicity that are baked into how that disinformation spread. So from here, I want to turn to some case studies of disinformation, which will be on the next slide. And before I get into that, I want to pause and let folks know that there is a content warning for some of the things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to be talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically its effects on Black communities, as well as hate crimes against East Asian American communities. So if you need to, please take care of yourself, mute your device. Know you can come back in about 5 minutes when we're on a screen with a lot of purple on it, because that will mean that we're definitely done with this topic. So please take care of yourselves. And from there, I'll go on to talk about Canaries in the Coal Mine, which is an article written by Brandy Collins Dexter. And in this research, she talks about how COVID-19 misinformation affects Black communities in particular. And before I begin, I want to explore the idea of the canary in the coal mine. So starting in the early 20th century, canaries were taken down into mines and acted as a form of technology for miners in the early detection of extremely poisonous and scentless carbon monoxide gas. And so miners knew if the canary, with its more sensitive respiratory system, stopped singing, that it was time to leave the mine immediately. And this metaphor has been used to describe America's relationship to Black people on a number of issues, from resource management in Flint, so in their water crisis, to surveillance, to medical abuse, to climate change, and more. And so what happens ultimately in Black communities sort of rings the alarm for what will happen to broader white and non-Black American society. And so that's where the use of canaries in the coal mine as a title is useful here, because it reverberates to how we see disinformation from the Black community shape the rest of American society. And so since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, Brandy's team at Harvard tracked how COVID-19 was being discussed in Black communities online. And they used this research framework called ethnography, where they tracked how conspiracies and disinformation across message boards and tech platforms worked. And so they identified 4 predominant narratives spreading in Black communities in the United States about COVID, such as Black people could not die from COVID-19, the virus was man-made for the purpose of population control, the virus could be contained using herbal remedies, and that 5G radiation from phones was somehow the root cause of COVID-19. And so some of this misinformation appears to be targeted directly at the community by outsiders, while some has grown up organically within specific Black communities. And in this report, she exposes how historical oppression, medical mistrust, lack of access to healthcare, and failures by internet platforms all shape these like false narratives online. And this leaves individuals at a great personal risk. So if we're thinking about Black communities and their ability to access information that's true and real, that shapes everything. It shapes people's ability to vote. It shapes their ability to be informed on matters that are of really high national importance. And so Brandy and her team conclude this report by recommending specific steps that the press can take to better represent the health realities of Black Americans and to keep them informed. And that tech companies must safeguard accuracy on their platforms, which means clamping down on misinformation and supporting the dissemination of medical information that speak directly to Black communities. In the next example, on our next slide, we're going to talk about COVID-19 in East Asian communities in the US. And so in this second case study of public health and racialized disinformation, I want to talk about how there was a huge rise in hate crimes and scapegoating against East Asian communities early on in the pandemic, especially. So in the spring of 2020, there was a huge rise in racist hate crimes against East Asian people in the US. Civil rights organizations like Chinese for Affirmative Action and the Asia Pacific Policy Planning Council logged over 650 reports of bias-based attacks on Asian Americans during March 2020. And some of these reports included cases where people of Asian descent were reported being refused service at grocery stores, being spit on, being verbally assaulted, and in some cases, physically assaulted as well. And so I want to talk about who shaped the spread of that disinformation on our next slide. And first, I want to talk about how Donald Trump and other US officials have deliberately referred to COVID as the China virus or the Wuhan virus. And failures of internet platforms and media putting this into the lexicon by reporting and using images that associate East Asian people with COVID. I also want to highlight that this isn't new. So immigrants and Black people have been similarly blamed for infectious diseases throughout US history. Examples of this include Haitian communities in New York City in the 80s and 90s who were accused of spreading HIV, Jewish immigrants in the 1830s who were accused of spreading tuberculosis. And I want to talk more about how these cases serve a larger national narrative and serve empire. And specifically, I want to talk about how it deems people as citizens and non-citizens. And what I mean by that is that when someone is deemed a citizen, they're granted safety and security and access to basic needs, at least sometimes. But when it comes to non-citizens, people get criminalized, and therefore people see them as not worthy of protection, not worthy to be granted safety and access to basic needs. And so unfortunately, public health disinformation like this still serves the US empire through racism and through harmful narratives about people and their access to public health. And so from here, I want to pivot us to talk more about the activity I specifically did with Generation Justice over the summer in their fellowship. And this was a wheel activity that I designed for this group of people because I wanted people to think more about how disinformation shapes their everyday reality. And so while we're pulling that up, I'll talk about how this activity connects systemic forms of racism in public health and puts them into context for people to make sense of them in their everyday lives. And so this activity talks about the function of disinformation and how it exists on multiple levels. We most often think of it on the operational level. So often when I think of disinformation, I think of radio stations, newspapers, media outlets. I think of social media platforms, but we often forget that disinformation is driven by ideas of social regulation. So it's driven by patriarchy, it's driven by capitalism, it's driven by white supremacy, and it's driven by settler colonialism. And so to define a couple of those terms, settler colonialism is an idea that land in this country was stolen from Indigenous people. And that stealing of land came with its own ideas of property and ownership and harming and extracting from the environment. And so all of these ideologies listed here, they are pervasive. They shape our everyday lives and they work on multiple levels. And so institutionally, we can think about disinformation and how disinformation rooted in patriarchy, capitalism, settler colonialism, really functions to purport disinfo in our institutions as well. So for example, police, propaganda, and the ways that white supremacy and capitalism and conceptions of property are used in how we police, or like in schools, how education is shaped by different ideals where young people in our workshop talked about not being able to fully trust sometimes what they're learning in social studies classes because of conceptions of what critical race theory is or books that are banned in schools. These are all examples at the institutional level: voting, democracy, media companies, human rights, and government that can be shaped by disinformation and affect how those institutions function. At the community level, we can see disinformation show up as vaccine and mask hesitancy, We can see it as the rise of white supremacist groups, spreading disinformation online and recruiting people. We can see it as acting as if the pandemic is over, or even not seeking medical care because of fear or discomfort with healthcare practices. And interpersonally, on a very basic level, disinformation can look like rumors. It can look like reposting things on Facebook that are not true. It can look like hate crimes, like I mentioned earlier. And it can also look like the polarization of issues or gaslighting, so making people feel like their reality is not true. Lastly, at the internal level, when I was doing research, I learned that disinformation can actually lead to altered memories. And so people will think that they remember something a certain way when it actually occurred differently because they are fed disinformation about what happened. Or it can also turn into internalized self-hate. It can look like anger, denial, anxiety, stress. It can look like questioning one's own intuition when we're faced with so much disinfo and misinfo all the time. And so on the next page, this activity is sort of our reflection space that we did with Gianna and the other youth at Generation Justice. And we talked about how disinformation shapes our experiences and emotionally, spiritually, professionally, or in school. And from here, I want to pass it to Gianna to lead us in our dialogue about racialized disinfo and the fellowship that you did this summer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rumsha, for really giving us a refresher and going over that information that we were so lucky to get over this summer. And so, yeah, as you had mentioned, we did that wheel activity and really were able to, I think, really reflect on a personal level of how disinformation impacts us, but also get that broader level of how it's broken down on the different levels and the way it functions and just impacts every single one of us. And so now just to kind of ask some more questions and think about disinformation on even a deeper level. I know this summer you had really talked about how disinformation not only impacts our voices, but it also impacts our government and our democracy. And so I wanted to ask really what is at stake as a result of disinformation?
Sure. So in terms of what's at stake with disinformation, thank you for that amazing framing of that question, Gianna. I think that three things come to mind. I think first, like, as you mentioned, our democratic institutions are at stake. So we know that there's rampant disenfranchisement of people and their ability to vote, whether they're people who are formerly incarcerated or people who are not citizens, like I mentioned earlier. We know there's voter suppression in this country. But we also know that voting and the rise of white supremacy and key events like the insurrection on January 6th, 2021, are examples of how disinformation impact our government and our democracy. Secondly, I think that, like, related to why we're one of our biggest themes for today, I think the stake is also our health and our well-being. So medical misinformation, disinformation has spread so much in many communities, and it's aided by those highest in our government sometimes because they're working with negligent social media platforms that are profitable. This is true when it comes to vaccine hesitancy, mask hesitancy. And it also, I think it's stress, like the stress in our bodies that shows up when we don't know what to trust or what platforms to trust. And then lastly, what I think is at stake would be our movements. So when I think about disinformation, especially on social media platforms, I see the ways hate goes unchecked. And I see the ways that social justice activists are often penalized on these platforms. I think our freedom movements are the largest organized defense against this slide into right-wing authoritarianism, and they depend on our ability to access reliable information. We know that tech billionaires and news outlets profit from pushing the most negative stuff into our timelines. And I think that's really like a big part of the issue too.
Oh, yeah, of course. Thank you so much for that answer and breaking it down sort of into like three pieces. I feel like that brought a lot of clarity for me. And I have to say I agree. I feel like what really resonated with me as well is that internal stress of when you don't know where to go for information. It impacts us not only health wise, but literally just stress and not knowing where to go for information. And also thinking about how like that lack of just knowing where to go impacts whole movements, which is crazy, but it's completely happening around us all the time. And so thank you so much. um, I want to now ask you to talk to us a little bit more about racialized disinformation, and really like how you perceive it, but also how do we spot it?
Yes. So I think at first I want to say that no type of disinformation or misinformation is not racialized. And I mentioned this earlier too, but I really want to like emphasize that like nothing can be exempt from our conversations on race because I think that it's entwined with things. Often we see whiteness as like the standard or what's normal, and that's also rooted in race, right? Like white people should also be racialized. Um, every type of misinformation or disinformation serves a purpose and cannot be excluded from that conversation on race. Um, I think this question makes me think a lot about a guide that our partners at Ultraviolet created, which is about how to spot racial and gender disinformation. And in that outline, they sort of talk about how you can look at certain tropes in your news coverage and what they focus on. And so certain tropes like implying that there's a connection between Arab Americans or Muslims with terrorism is a trope that one can see in racialized disinfo, or assuming all Latinx people are immigrants, or focusing on a Black person's hair or their way of speak when covering a news story on them. Using narratives about needing police or that police keep us safe. These are all ways that racialized disinformation plays out and that we can spot it in our media.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really important, as you said, to really acknowledge that like there is no such thing as disinformation that isn't rooted in race and bringing it up as an issue and who impact BIPOC, of course, directly. And so I appreciate that. And also just understanding, how do we spot it? Because it's hard to see specifically, like looking at the tropes makes so much sense of pay attention to how they frame things, what issues they're focusing on, and the connections they make. Um, and so you provided some examples, but I know like currently, of course, racialized disinformation is always around us, but I feel like even now it's being heightened. And so what are some like big or just current examples that you think of that are happening?
I think currently right now, there's a lot of disinformation about police, which is also another term for that is propaganda. So I was talking to a group yesterday about how local news in Chicago is stating that police officers are leaving the police force to move to the suburbs, or that they're retiring or just leaving the force in general. When in reality, that's not true. In fact, our mayor in Chicago recently released a new budget for the city that increased the police budget to almost $2 billion. So they have more than enough resources to be recruiting police officers and retaining them. It's about making people think that we need police and making people think that police keep us safe when in reality they don't. And so I think a lot of local news outlets in many different cities sort of push that narrative and are often interconnected with local police. And I think that that's a really common use of racialized disinformation, especially as different cities are releasing their budgets for the next year, and they want to make it seem like we need massive police budgets.
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of that happening even within my own community, but I hadn't like thought of it specifically as racialized disinformation. So yeah, I think we see it happening everywhere, but that's really important to think about it from that lens. And so in the curriculum that you designed for Generation Justice, you also focused really on the systemic aspects of disinformation and kind of how it breaks down. And so I wanted to ask, just why was it important for you to really train us in this way, which I feel is very unique to this curriculum of breaking down the systemic aspects of how disinformation works?
Yeah, thanks for this question. I think to start, some context is that I was a youth organizer for about 5 years, and I worked with queer, Black, and Brown youth in a really conservative part of Michigan, doing political education and organizing led by young people. And in that process, because of the fact that we always had youth come in and question their own experiences of harm, whether it was experiences of harm at school or with police or with doctors or with caregivers, people would always question, like, did this really happen to me? Like, I feel like something went wrong here. And they would come in and ask some of our adult organizers, like, was this okay? And 99% of the time it wasn't. And I think the reason why talking about disinformation with young people is so important to me is that I think it's important young people trust their intuition and trust their truth. So if you feel like something's wrong, you can leave a situation. And to me, disinformation feels like a more macro level of how distrust of one's own experience or community members or media can create harm. And so for me in this process, it was really important to create a connection between systemic and personal, because I want people to feel like their personal experience is not by coincidence, or like the harm they experience is not just by coincidence. History has led us to where we are today, and young people aren't alone in how they're experiencing the institutions in front of them. Which I hope, I have a question for you now too, which I hope is sort of related, which is, how do you see issues of disinformation and public health show up in your community right now? And how do you think it's different right now this fall than it was in previous years?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I appreciate it because I think thinking about disinformation, it's often easy to think of it as like this broad scale thing that's hard to hone in on, like, how do we see it? How is it affecting me and my story? And that narrative of like, this is my life and how has disinformation impacted that can be hard to do, which is why I appreciate it, because I feel like the training that we did this summer has really helped me to acknowledge and think about what's happening in my community currently. And so I think some of the biggest things I've noticed is just often just disinformation about COVID, especially. And I think it's different this fall, a little bit more so than it was last year. This is, I feel like, one of the topics that's shifted the most, mainly because I think right now, especially within New Mexico, of course, across the country, but even just here within my school community on a smaller level, I see a lot of disinformation about and just lack of acknowledgement that the pandemic's very much so still happening. It's impacting people's lives. And also that we're in a very much so recovery period almost of post-pandemic. And there's just a lot of disinformation about vaccines. They're still very important. You need to stay updated. And so generally, I feel like COVID has had a lot of disinformation. And now it's also spread in the way of it's not spread, if that makes sense. Real information, where do you get resources? That's not really in the light anymore. And now it's just kind of the general disinfo of it's not a thing. We don't have to worry about it. But I think also just in general, thinking about public health is big issues around behavioral health. I think in general, New Mexico, we have a very broken behavioral health system that's been in recovery for quite a few years now. And I think even on my school level, just thinking about wellness and how do we support each other within community and the idea of mutual aid in general. I think there's a lot of disinfo and the fact that it's not an issue or there's policing and surveillance are going to save and going to solve the problem, and really be a way of I don't know, cultivating a healthier New Mexico, when that's really, I mean, I think thinking about mutual aid, it's so much more effective and really, taking care of each other by being there for each other, like it's rooted in community. And so feel like disinformation has really seeped into how we think about behavioral health here in New Mexico. And so those are two of the biggest things, but I feel like nationally and here in New Mexico, just the current elections that are happening, there's just a lot of disinformation about the candidates, about the issues that are happening. And I think bringing up that stress idea is people don't really know where to go for information about where do I register to vote? Where do I get information about who I should vote for, the things that they believe in? Does it align with me? And so right now, I feel like those are the three biggest things that just come to my brain when thinking about how I see it just functioning. And then, of course, like I feel that. I know people in my community feel that, my friends, my family. And so, on that personal level, um, it really does function on in ways that are oftentimes more negative than they are like, let's just tackle it, let's get into it and fixing the issue. Sometimes we just have to sit and say, all right, this is what we're dealing with. But yeah, I would say those are the biggest things that I think of.
That's real. And I'm curious about, I know in your intro, we talked about the Protect Our Hoods New Mexico work that you've done. And I'm curious to hear more about like what you've done since the Generation Justice Fellowship this summer. What has the disinformation training led you to do since? Like, I think that really is interwoven with a lot of what you're saying right now. So I would love to hear more.
Yeah, so I feel like after this summer, we really had that view of, okay, here's what we're facing. Here's what disinformation is. So how do we kind of deal with it? And I think for me personally, I have now had the doors open for me to have conversations like this and be involved in discussions and thinking about disinformation. But I'm also presenting for FCYO here in New Mexico at Tamaya, which is where we are going to gather, and Generation Justice, a group of 5 of us, are going to go and present about disinformation, talk about it, what it is, and also how we protect ourselves and just overall media literacy. How do we deal with disinformation in the current day and time? And so that's a new opportunity that's really come as a result of just getting the information and awareness of what it is. But also, Generation Justice will be a part of collaborating with other organizations from across the nation to build new curriculum about how do we teach disinformation? How do we help other youth and just other people curious about it, or other people who may not even be aware of it? How do we introduce them to it? And how do we teach it? Like, create curriculum on how do we create something that others can use to just spread the word and give awareness to it. So I feel like those are specific things that have just come as a result, but also for, I think, our social media campaign, it's really helped us to strategize how we want it to work and present to the public. And so I think those have been some of the biggest things that have really come a result that I've been able to be a part of. But also, as I said, like personally thinking about disinformation and knowing how to even like do research in classes for school. How do I go and find research for different topics? How do I know that it's accurate? Things like that are all having to do with that information that I got this summer.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm so happy. I'm so happy that it helped shape that for you. And really it's such an honor to remain connected with you and Generation Justice in this work. And yeah, I think it's really important to think about what are also the hard skills. I think something you said that surprised me was like how much this has helped shape just doing research in general in school or just for things you're curious about. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I mean, I'm so appreciative as well to you and your curriculum and just media justice in general for being so catered to just fighting disinformation and being there as a support to feel like overall bring liberation to us as BIPOC specifically, but of course everyone, and being able to share accurate information. And that I feel does go down to those hard skills of just questioning the media and understanding that it's something important that we have to do. Um, and so that pretty much closes out the questions that I had for you. I don't know if you have any more for me, but that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot today, and I really appreciate just being able to sit down with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think now we will pass it to Dulani to close us out.
Thank you both so much for that amazing conversation. It was so inspiring to learn about the work that you've been engaged in, Gianna, and that Generation Justice has been engaged in. And the curriculum that you developed, Rumsha, is so informative, such a helpful framework to think about how racialized disinformation impacts us. So thank you everyone for coming. Please follow Generation Justice's work and Media Justice's work, and keep an eye out for more events coming up related to public health, information and technology. Thank you all. Have a good night.